Thank you. Hello and welcome. Thank you all for coming along to the fifth in a series of disaster recovery conversations brought to you by the Victorian Council of Social Service. I'd like to begin today by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land from where I'm presenting, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. I'd also like to acknowledge and thank the Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation, which has generously provided the funding to allow this conversation and other work in the bushfire recovery space to take place. I'd also like to introduce Stan and Tyson, who you'll see on your screen today, and they're our Auslan interpreters. Just a reminder for everyone that we're recording and transcribing today's conversation, so you can share it across your networks at any time, and if you need to leave early, you can pop back and watch the rest. If you've got a question for any of our speakers, please submit them on the Q&A tab on your screen. So today we're here to talk about a really important topic, looking after yourself and looking after your staff during recovery. And I think I really can't emphasise how important this is. We all look to our leaders to provide us with inspiration and guidance, and leaders look to their staff to keep things moving and keep things going. And if the wheels start to fall off, if people get burnt out, tired, stressed, overwhelmed, or worse, it's a real problem. To open today's conversation, I'm really proud to introduce Emma King. Emma King is the CEO of VCOSS. And VCOSS itself now has, of course, had first-hand experience of an emergency with the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Welcome, Emma.
Thank you so much, Bridget. Thanks for the introduction and also for the incredible work that you do for Bridget and in bringing the opportunity for today together as well. If I can also start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land. I'm on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and would like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are with us today. I would also like to acknowledge that sovereignty has never been ceded. Well, the topic of today's conversation, as Bridget said, is caring for yourselves and your staff during recovery. And given the last 2 years that we've had, well, this topic could never be more important. During disasters and crises, we know that workers in the community sector are acutely aware of the trauma and the pain that is experienced by local communities. The Black Summer bushfires, the pandemics, the lockdowns, and now the recent storms have really just pushed people to the limits. The impacts of these cascading disasters are significant. They're complex and they're often long-term. Beyond the immediate threat to lives and to livelihoods are a whole host of other things. We know the flow-on effects can include, increased exposure in terms of looking at issues around mental health, alcohol and other drugs, family violence, unemployment, and chronic disease. And community organisations, you and your staff are the people who are on the ground at these times. You provide support through some of the most difficult situations imaginable. You are known, you are loved, and you are trusted by your local communities. But you and everyone else attending this conversation today also need support. You need to have your experiences acknowledged, your fatigue recognised, the times that you feel overwhelmed recognised, and to have your own recovery focused on as well. It's been a very long 18 months since the Black Summer bushfires. With all of the interruptions, the complications, and the trauma of COVID-19 and lockdowns, we know there is still a very, very long way to go in terms of the recovery process. The recent storms, the flooding and the power failures have obviously added just further stress for just so many. Unfortunately, with climate change, we know that these kinds of cascading disasters are expected to continue. So community organisations are going to continue to play a vital role in helping communities prepare for disasters, to recover from them, and also to build resilience. Your skills and knowledge and the very, very deep connections that you have in your communities, your unique networks, your resources, and your focus on people who may be disadvantaged and vulnerable, it's just indispensable. There's no other way to be able to describe it. But put simply, this role is not going to be sustainable unless you have the opportunity to look after yourself as well. Leaders and staff in community organisations, as Bridget said, everyone needs qualified support to process and to recover from disasters, both in terms of the direct impact that's sustained by your organisation and also the indirect impact in terms of dealing with so much community pain and so much need. Because of the dedication that you and your organisations have to vulnerable people and communities, your own recovery and your own resilience building can often be sidelined. So on behalf of VCOSS, I really want to say a very sincere thank you for everything that you do. We know that in times of disasters, you are the first port of call for your communities because you are known, you are loved, and you are trusted. I want to thank you for your care that you show, for your concern, your professionalism, and for your skills. Thank you for going above and beyond every single day. We hope that this event today, and along with other resources provided by VCOSS, will be very much a space in which to focus on your own wellbeing and your own recovery needs. Thanks again to Bridget and the team for pulling today together. Thank you again to the Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation. Your partnership really does mean the world. I'm now going to hand you back to Bridget, who's going to introduce you to today's speakers. And I, like you, am thrilled to be part of this event and really look forward to hearing from the fantastic experts that we've got lined up to speak today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Emma. And if I can just reflect too on some of the work that VCOSS is doing at the moment in looking back at the work of the community sector since the COVID-19 and the extraordinary work, the way that the sector has adapted and continued to provide services and provide enhanced services to whole new cohorts of people that have needed it. We've transformed the way we worked literally overnight, and another thing about the sector is that it has not stopped. We did not stop for 1 minute to provide services to vulnerable people and to people with new and emerging needs. And I just think what an extraordinary sector we are, and how tired we're all feeling a bit at this moment. I'm really pleased to introduce to you our next speaker. Our next speaker is Jolie Wills, who is a mental health expert in disaster and disruption and co-founder of an organisation called Hummingly. Jolie's from New Zealand. She has a master's in cognitive psychology and is a leading mental health expert in disaster and disruption. She's also a survivor of the Christchurch earthquake and has lived disaster recovery with her family firsthand. Jolie has studied how the mind works after disaster, how we make decisions, and our reactions and behaviours are impacted by stress. Jolie advises on recovery from the community level through to recovery leadership. Her areas of interest include workforce resilience and wellbeing, psychosocial recovery, leadership and storytelling. And I know that Jolie has an amazing story to tell and some fantastic wisdom to impart. Welcome, Jolie.
Thank you very much. And Bridget and Emma so beautifully said, this is a topic that I am incredibly passionate about, so I'm very pleased to be here today. So tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. So for me, I guess you could say my story started, we're talking about storytelling. My story started very early one morning. It was in the pitch dark. It was on the 4th of September in 2010. And we were woken by a very violent 7.1 earthquake that was based very close to our home. So disaster, like most of us, we don't end up working in this space by choice. Sometimes it knocks on our door, or in my case, comes to give it a really good rattle. And life for me and my community and my family from there on in has been very different. I really want to get to how it is that I became interested in this topic of supporting the supporters in disaster recovery. And it came to be that I ended up with a team of staff working for New Zealand Red Cross, designing the psychosocial programming to support people impacted by the earthquakes in Christchurch. And it was obvious, I think, from very early on that we had for example, as a leader, I was impacted by the earthquakes myself. I'm leading a team that's impacted by the event themselves, who are leading a large team of volunteers who are impacted, who are then supporting people in the community that are impacted. And we knew that the stress and the pressure and the need was going to go on for a really long period of time. So from early on, we thought, well, how are we going to sustain this? How are we going to sustain the support to others when our people are going to get really tired? It's just going to happen. it's to be expected. And so with that in mind, we put everything in place around our team that we could think of at the time. So we had, the usual briefing and debriefing. We had peer support. We had mentoring. We had professional supervision. We had counselling. We had yoga at lunchtime. We had walking groups. We had shared lunches. You named it. We threw the whole kit and caboodle at our team in the hope that we could really protect them from the impacts of prolonged stress. And long story short, we were still burning people out. And to me, that just wasn't okay. And when I started to look around at the other tables that we sat down at, whether it was with government or community groups or other social services, we could just see the exhaustion, that was really starting to appear in all of the supporters that were helping people in the community. And I remember one particular meeting where a funder had really come to the party and said, we have some recovery funding and we understand as leaders of social services or people working directly in communities, you best know what is needed in a community right now. We want your ideas and we're going to make it really easy to fund those ideas to support recovery in the community, which was just so exciting to hear. But then the next thing that was said was, but we can't fund staff, we can't fund staffing, and we can't fund kai, which is food. And I just remember the energy in the room shifting, that we often work on a shoestring in the sector, before a big event happens. And then you step up and do so much more with very little after an event. And that just goes on for such a long period of time. And people were so tired. And the thought of having to do more, like put forward more ideas, but with no more people, I think was just so difficult to really get your head around. And so I don't think the funder that particular day got the response that they expected. I think people said instead, we really need a holiday. We need a floating person who can give us a break. We need some admin support. We need simpler reporting. We just need some of the load taking off us. And that led me to think, okay, this is not the first disaster the world's ever had. This is clearly a really big problem. It was impacting the people working in the space. It's impacting the mission that we all have in supporting others. It's impacting in so many ways. So how have other people experienced this in other disasters around the world? How do we better support those working in this space? So that led to a Winston Churchill Fellowship. And I was really lucky to be able to visit different disasters around the world and get a sense as to whether or not this tiredness was typical and normal or whether it was just us. Yeah. So one of the very first places I visited was Kinglake in your very own Victoria. And I met the wonderful Anne Leadbeater, who many of you will probably know, and she was working for Murindindi Shire Council. And I was asking her, is this something that your team's experiencing, that you're experiencing too? Or is it just us? And I remember her really having a wonderful way of explaining what it's like to be working in this space and saying it is very much like carrying this increasing load of bricks. She said, before the event, your life's busy, you have responsibilities, you have, especially to the community, you have responsibilities at home, you're often working on a shoestring, and so you're carrying a load as part of life. And then the event happens and a whole lot of bricks get added to your load, and suddenly the weight is a great deal heavier. And then over time, you think eventually, like this should peter out a bit and I should be able to put some of these bricks down. But instead, she said, what you find is that your own recovery process, if you're going through it yourself, is a lot longer and more convoluted and bureaucratic than what you anticipated. The community need often just becomes more complex rather than less. And your bricks just seem to keep gathering over time rather than getting lighter. And it may be that, someone else in your team, quite understandably, has reached their limit and needs a hand. And so you're that person that always says yes, always steps up. And so you find yourself carrying some of her bricks as well. And she said, and then the issue is that, your boss might come to you, or your manager or your funder and say, it's really important that you look after yourself. I can recognise you've got a lot going on. But can you do 3 more things for me by the end of the week? And so there's the sense that we know we need to look after ourselves, but how difficult and impossible it can feel at this point. So she just had a beautiful way of really highlighting the relentlessness of it and the cumulative nature of the stress of working in this kind of space. And then in answer to my question around, is it just us? Is it just us experiencing this? She very much said yes. My next port of call was Japan. And there we were visiting communities impacted by the recent, earthquake and tsunami that they had not long after we had ours. And I remember I was explaining how we were feeling here in Christchurch, and asking whether or not there was something, similar being felt for them over there, and starting from that position. And the lady that I was interviewing, we were working through an interpreter. And I was very conscious of, there might be some cultural differences, and I just wanted to get it right. And the next thing, after asking a few questions, she was running around the room chanting something, and I thought I had really made a terrible misstep. And so I was quite nervous. I said to the interpreter, what have I done? What is she saying? And she said, no, it's okay. She's just chanting, I'm human, I am human, I am human. So I think there was something in that. She said to me, in that first year, she was working on sorting temporary accommodation for people impacted by the tsunami. And she said in that first year, she had all this energy, and she had this driving mission, and she was just so excited about the work that she was doing. It was so important. And she said the second year she had the driving mission and she was excited, but she'd lost the energy. And by the third year, she said she was really starting to lose the feeling of, why am I doing this? And she said, what is wrong with me? But she felt that she could admit that to anyone around her, because, she really felt that she should be there for the mission and everything else, and just wondered if maybe it's her, maybe she's not all that she thought she'd be able to step up to do. And so she invited me for dinner that night, and invited her team along, and said to me, please tell them what you told me. And I think the message here very much was that, if you're finding this difficult working in this space, it's because it is. Yeah. And I think it's just good to know that, because often we really judge ourselves quite harshly, especially over time. As we become tired, I think our confidence can erode if we don't react or cope in the way that we think we should or anticipate that we would. And actually, it's really good to know that that's normal. And if it feels hard, it's because it is. Yeah. So I think that was my first message that came through strongly from that Winston Churchill Fellowship. This slide I don't want to spend much time on, but it's important. This one here, because one of the questions I was asking was, okay, if it's difficult, then this prolonged stress situation, what are the pressures? What are the stressors that people are facing? And I think we often really think it's going to be about the aftermath of the disaster, which is unavoidable, right? So the unavoidable bricks. The more I explored, there were three types of bricks or pressures, that people were really feeling, the stressors. The one was the unavoidable that's related to the disaster, which, added a huge amount of complexity and difficulty that, you couldn't escape from it. There was just something you had to find a way to manage. Then there was the pressures that we add to our own stack, and it might be that feeling of, I'm always the one who says yes and I'll find a way. But most significantly, there were a lot of stressors that were around the organisational piece. Yeah. So if you think about the organisational realities, it might be that the organisations or the funding systems, for example, or the ways of working just don't match the recovery realities. So often there was a lot that is avoidable or preventable, or could at least be explored, that in terms of some of the weight that we're carrying and the frustration that people are carrying, bricks, in a sense, that relate to an organisational aspect that can be addressed. One of the things that I think I found most sobering, and we were starting to see it play out amongst our own people, but most sobering was just asking what was the impact, especially for people that were further along the track than what we were at. What is the impact for people, for the supporters who are working in this prolonged stress space, especially if we don't look after ourselves or are given the support that is required? And it was incredibly sobering. All of these are themes that came quite strongly from the research, and it is incredibly sobering. And I think too, for me, these aren't abstract. I can put faces of friends or colleagues or others I know around me to these, and I think we can think about these as abstract concepts, but they're things that don't happen to you or your friends or your colleagues until once you see it happen. It's really hard to undo, and you really wish that you hadn't ended up in this place. So the impact of prolonged stress, about hazards like it's really obvious. You're standing on scaffolding around what could go wrong with injury and harm, and just wanting to paint the picture around, the abstract. This is what happens to people working in the space if we're not well supported or able to look after ourselves. This too was the impact for the organisations themselves. It was huge. So it's not just about the people working in the space, it's also about the very mission that those people are trying to serve. Yeah. So it has huge impacts of not being able to look after ourselves, after our people well. And I just want to balance that up with the idea of growth and the potential that really can be gained from working in the space. And for me, it's about achieving the balance where you minimise the damage, the possibility of damage, and we need to make this really clear that can be a very hazardous space to work in. But on the flip side, it's also an incredibly rewarding space to work in. And if we can manage this well, there's incredible growth in terms of the skills that you learn, the empathy you pick up, and all of those things that you can carry into your future career and into your life outside work. So just to balance it up, it is about minimising this damage and maximising the chance of growth for people working in the space. Okay, and I'm just going to cover this briefly, but one of the challenges we were seeing with our people in that, as I said, we've thrown everything we could at the team, including some training and some education around the ways in which we should be looking after ourselves. And the biggest gap that we saw, and you'll probably be feeling this quite viscerally because I know I did myself, was that you could know that you've got to look after yourself. You can know that you should eat 5 fruit and veggies a day. You know that you've got to get some exercise, but it just feels like another brick you've got to carry and something else that you can feel guilty about not doing when the pressure's on. So the gap between knowing it and doing it when the pressure's on seemed to be this chasm that we didn't seem to be able to bridge for ourselves and for our people. And so that led to the creation of the Doing Well tool, which is really a set of methods to help make it really simple and practical and easy to get intentional about looking after ourselves, and all while the pressure's on. So all things that can be achieved under pressure. It's the tool that we really wished we'd had. So we have on the Hummingly website, you can grab a set of those Doing Well cards with a 20% discount for if you put VCOSS in the shopping cart. But I just wanted to mention that briefly because it's one of those tools that we really wished we had. I keep pressing the wrong thing to go forward. Okay, and going back to those bricks where there were 3 types of bricks and 3 types of stressors, I think too, one thing that became really obvious is that when you think about the individual responsibility, we can say it's really important, Anne, that you look after yourself, but here's 3 more things, right? It can feel impossible if we don't have the organisational piece sorted as well. So we can't put all the responsibility on individuals to look after themselves. We need to think about it as a triple responsibility. So as people working in the space, there's a lot that we need to do to be able to put things in place to look after ourselves so that we can sustain our efforts in looking after others. It's absolutely critical. But then at the team level, there's a lot that we can do to support each other. And at the organisational level as well, it's incredibly important. And if you think about this whole organisational piece, it's everything from is the culture one where people can ask for support if they need to? Is it a culture of sacrifice? What is the leadership style like? Yeah, what are the systems that are in place? Do they match the current needs, or are there extra barriers and burdens that could maybe be addressed and looked at? So just thinking about what are those organisational bricks and where it is possible to see if there's a way of addressing those. Yeah, so really important to look at things from a triple responsibility. So I just wanted to leave you with a few resources. One is the Doing Well set, which is that important piece for the individual, and there's also some team pieces that you can do as well. The Pandemic Pack is another one that is actually freely downloadable from our website. So that's a useful one for COVID. It's much smaller, but it's got some 30 quite useful messages. The Leading in Disaster Recovery, a Companion Through the Chaos. That one's really helpful for leadership in this space. It's a very difficult environment in which to navigate in terms of leadership, and also in understanding the things that are useful and the questions to be asking yourselves in this leadership space, especially when it comes to looking after your teams. And lastly, the Supporting the Supporters website. So that is the results from that Winston Churchill Fellowship, which looks at, what is it that people experience in this kind of work? Why is it challenging? What are the benefits? What are the things that we need to do to better look after people working in this space? And that includes sort of 12 key principles that came out of that research. So if you have teams working in this space, that's a really critical resource. And we can send, I'm assuming it'll be some of these out afterwards, or they're in the latest bulletin. But supportingthesupporters.org is that website. Before I go to that one, I think there's sort of two key messages that I think are really important at this point. Just how hard it is to do the looking after yourself and looking after your staff in this kind of environment. It's incredibly challenging, but we just cannot afford not to. Yeah. And again, going back to that message, if you find it's hard, then it's not a reflection on you. It is very much a reflection of, working in the space is super challenging. So don't be too hard on yourself around this. But yeah, very much we can't afford not to, for all the reasons that Emma talked about earlier, to look after ourselves and after our people. And I just want to leave you with one last challenge, and it won't be a popular one. And I know it's a message that I hated to hear, but it's a really important one. The final challenge is, as tired as you're feeling right now, which is all very normal and very natural to be expected, are you prepared for the next thing? So if looking after yourself or looking after your staff feels really challenging right now, it's even more important to do it, because we need to have something just a little bit left in the tank for the next thing that life might serve us up. So just a good sobering question to be checking in. Often we try and run just on the borderline and just keep going and squeeze everything we can get out of ourselves. And so, look after ourselves because we can't afford not to, but also because we need to have something in the tank in case something else comes along. So I hope that's helpful. Thank you. And just thank you for all the work you're doing. We know how critical all your roles are, and love to find any way we can to support you in your critical roles as supporters. Thank you.
That is wonderful. Thank you so much, Jolie. And I know that Jolie has and her co-director Elizabeth have been in Victoria, have provided services to a range of community organisations and others as they've been working through recovery over the past 18 months or so, and I know that they're available to come out as well. And I really want to acknowledge Jolie giving us her time today. Jolie and Elizabeth run a business based on supporting people through disaster recovery, and she's generously given us her time today, and also the discount that she mentioned earlier on for people listening in today and VCOSS members. Jolie's work is just so incredible. It's born of both experience and research, and I think it's really evident that it mostly brings with it incredible humanity. And I know that I'm sitting here with tears in my eyes thinking about, my colleagues right across the state, as well as some of my colleagues in VCOSS, some of who found it tougher than others. And your words are so incredibly appreciated and ring incredibly true, Jolie. So thank you so much. I hope you're available to stay for the rest of the session. If we have time at the end, we'll have some Q&A with the other speakers, and I know that there'll be some questions coming through directly for you. So thank you again, Jolie. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for listening. That was just incredible. I feel really, really humbled by having Jolie here. Next up, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Jarryd Williams. Jarryd is the Bushfire Recovery Manager for Gateway Health. He manages a team of 12. This team coordinates recovery support for bushfire-affected families and individuals in Victoria's northeast. They organise a range of assistance across areas including mental health, legal aid, financial counselling, grant writing, and material aid, including things like fencing, bedding, clothing, household items, and providing feed for animals. So there's a bit of everything there. Gateway Health also advocates to all levels of government to access support for individual members of affected communities and lobbies for their needs. I'm really pleased that Jarryd's able to be here today to share with us some of his insights and reflections on how his team has been coping over the last 18 months. Welcome, Jarryd.
Thanks, Bridget. Good afternoon, everybody. I think I might be here to show you why all of this discussion around keeping yourselves healthy and well is so important. My team and I operate across the northeast of Victoria, so we're across 6 local government areas, and we're funded by the state government of Victoria and the federal government to provide, as Bridget said, multiple layers of support and practical assistance to individuals and families who are impacted by the Bushfire summer event. So the assistance we provide, as Bridget also indicated, is pretty broad. Everything from family violence and mental health all the way through to installing septics, organising fences and running projects around communications infrastructure to try and get things back up and running now that the fires are well and truly over. So we were designed to be a central point of contact for services and tradespeople and anyone that you can imagine who was working with the people who were impacted by the fires. So it was our job to kind of organise things for everybody and leave the individual and their families alone so that they could get on with the job of healing and doing what was important, which was taking care of themselves and taking care of their communities and trying to rebuild their communities. So we're a group of qualified counsellors and psychologists, social workers and other health service professionals. And I think it's safe to say that when we took the job, none of us realised what we were getting ourselves into. We were warned during our interview that we would be hitting the ground running, and we were warned that it would be pretty intense. And all of us had some experience in working disasters in the past. Some worked with the Black Saturday fires. I worked in the Queensland floods. So we all had experience with trauma and with helping people to rebuild their lives. But the Black Summer Fire event was so, it's a word that's been overused, but it was so unprecedented that no one could plan what would be needed. No one could understand what the full impacts would be. And we certainly didn't expect that we would be chasing sheep, dodging deer, running logistics problems to get shipping containers and feed into really, really remote areas. And we never expected to be doing things like giving brief intervention counselling sessions in the middle of an open field while milking a cow. And, in fact, one of the best client support sessions I've ever given in my life, and I've been in the industry for 28 years now, was done while I was knee deep in mud and some other not so pleasant stuff, pushing cows onto a transport so they could be moved from one paddock to another up in Victorian. So the nature of our jobs means that we're on the road most days. As a team, it's hard for us because even if COVID hadn't happened, we still wouldn't be seeing each other every single day. We wouldn't be having those wonderful incidental conversations, which can sometimes spark off some pretty interesting ideas, create some pretty amazing solutions. We don't get that. Our job was always going to be remote and outreach based to some degree, not to the degree it has become, but to some degree. So in reflecting back over the last 18 months, it's hard to pull a few little stories together to share with you, to show you some of the work that we've done, or to describe to you some of the work that we've done, and to also discuss the impact that that's had on the team. I think probably the most major impact was the very, very first lockdown. I came on board in February, so I was alone for a little while before we were able to recruit the team and get the team on board. And just as we started to bring them all on throughout March, we of course were locked down and everybody was forced to go home and work from home. At that point in time, none of us were allowed to move about the state. We eventually, within a week or two, received a special dispensation because we were part of the Emergency Management Act and we were allowed to move freely. So we were luckier than most of you. We weren't constrained to 5 or 10 kilometres or whatever it was. We could travel a couple of 100 kilometres to reach our clients. And that was, I think, something pretty amazing for all of us because many people were homeschooling. It was a chance to turn to your partner and say, you can look after the kids now. I'm going to jump in the truck and I'm going to go for a drive and I'll be gone for 5 hours. That was a little bit of accidental, unintended mental health support. But it also allowed us to have real face-to-face connections. When I first wrote the program, when I was brought on board, my instructions from the government were that we would be hub-based. So we would be in the Corryong hub or the Bright hub in the northeast, and clients would come to us and we would help them that way. And then eventually we'd move toward outreach. COVID changed all of that. We couldn't really engage in telehealth because the telecommunications infrastructure up in the Upper Murray in particular was severely damaged by the fires. So for people to get a phone signal, for people to get the internet, they literally had to climb a hill or a mountain, or they had to drive up to 50 kilometres into a reception spot so that they could make a phone call. So it became imperative for us to be able to move swiftly and move frequently and go to people's houses and work with them face to face. So for us, that gave us human contact outside of our families or whomever was allowed in our home at various particular times. But more importantly for our clients, it gave them that contact. The communities that we work with are exceptionally remote. So it's people on farms. Some of the towns have 12 families in them. Some of the towns have up to 1,200 families in them. But everybody is pretty dispersed across a wide geographic area. I think Towong Shire, for example, might be one of the largest shires in the state, but it's got one of the smallest populations. So, we can spend 10 hours up in the Upper Murray and only see 3 clients because we've got an hour's drive between clients or more. So for the clients who were already isolated and then forced into even more isolation, we became an accidental lifeline for them. We were that person that they could, if they could get a phone reception, they could call and have a talk to, or we were that person who would turn up and using strict COVID protocols, engage in a conversation with them, most often a cup of tea over a fence, talking about what their needs were and what we could do to support them. So for us, that was great. It enabled us to, I suppose, feel like we were really achieving something, but also see the results of that. I know talking to other colleagues within Gateway Health that quite often they felt quite frustrated working from home, not necessarily able to engage with each other, not necessarily able to see an outcome for the things that they were doing. But for us, we were able to see those outcomes on a regular basis. When the government rolled out something called short-term modular housing, we were able to go up and do site surveys with the surveyors, go up and watch the short-term modular houses land, go up and put furniture together for clients, provide food and bedding with the assistance of Give It, and feel like we were achieving a great deal because we could see it, because we were a part of it. It was really actively, we were actively engaged in everything that we were doing. On those times when we weren't able to travel, because we have case notes to write, we have other things to do, we did notice that the lockdown was really starting to impact on us mentally. We were really affected by the general confusion, the general fear that the virus has caused. We were affected by the way our families now, our children were responding to these particular issues. And, as the manager of the team, it was very easy for me to see that we were starting to get a little bit frayed around the edges, probably by about the 7th month of the recovery initiative. So working with the team and using some very democratic processes, we started to design a whole range of different things that would help us to pretty much stay sane. We did everything from create a virtual staff room where we would just use Zoom, and an invite would be sent out for a regular time every week. People could come in if they wanted to, and we could kind of just sit there and we would just be sitting there typing, and sometimes we'd turn around and we'd have a conversation. And it was our attempt to do that incidental stuff that happens in a normal work environment. When restrictions started to roll back, we took every opportunity that we could to grab coffees together, to go for jogs together, to spend time with each other. I was really lucky in that we recruited 12 people who clicked remarkably well. And on the first day, it was immediate. The feeling of connection that existed between all of us. And we became each other's best support for personal issues as well as for work issues across, the entire COVID lockdown, but also across the entire recovery initiative, which is still ongoing. We've still got another year ahead of us. What I discovered, in doing supervision with a number of the team, was that we really were the only people that we could depend on, because we could talk to our families about what we were experiencing and about the trauma that we were seeing in the people that we were helping, but they had no point of reference for that. Though many of our colleagues in Gateway are experienced in trauma-informed practice, they weren't doing what we were doing. So, they weren't walking through the remains of people's lives. Whenever you engaged with a client, particularly one who had lost a home, they would make sure that you came with them to what was left of their home, and you walked through it with them. They would point out where valuable items had once stood. They would tell you about the stories of raising their children in those homes, and they would, I guess, be in some way seeking validation that they had an amazing life at some point, and that perhaps there's this opportunity to rebuild that and to get that back. So holding space with people when you're walking through the remains of their lives, when there's nothing but melted slag and ash on the ground, can be really difficult. And it's hard to explain that in words or even in images to anybody, whether it's a colleague who is professionally trained like you are, or a family member or a close person or friend. Personally, I found that my dog is great. I don't know if she gets it, but she listens very well. But, in general, we were the only people that we could turn to discuss some of the issues that we were experiencing, some of the vicarious trauma that we were taking on board. So through those democratic processes of trying to find ways to connect more and more often and to do it face-to-face when we were allowed to, enriched our experience, I think, as a team, brought us closer as a team, but also gave us a way to manage the stress that we were feeling. We did all of the things that you're supposed to do, such as organising group supervision, clinical, individual, one-on-one supervision, doing regular admin supervision, attending network meetings, speaking with other colleagues as often as we could. But the role of case management, it's such an intimate connection with another human being or with another human being's family that you almost do become a part of their family, despite your best efforts not to. Everyone in the team has remarkably good boundaries, and we all agreed from the very beginning that we should do everything in our power not to create a dependency on us. But unfortunately, through COVID especially, and through the fact that some of the grant monies that were made available just weren't appropriate to a lot of our clients, and our brokerage money was, we did become a part of these people's families. So managing that and managing the normal life experiences that we all went through, our team, members of the team lost family members last year. We had a couple of serious health issues where people had to take a great deal of time off work. People's relationships got frayed. I think I had to talk a couple of staff members down from, dumping their children somewhere in the back of a river or a forest somewhere. There was a lot of things that everybody went through, and some of the things that we used to keep our heads above water and to maintain positivity and to maintain some sort of momentum in our work were very creative, I guess. Flexible work hours. I was at sometimes getting emails from staff members who were emailing me at 10 p.m. of a night, and I would say, "Why are you emailing me at 10 p.m.?" And they would be telling me because they had to homeschool throughout the day, they wanted to get certain things done for the job, they'd been on the road for however long or whatever else. So we would make agreements where we would have flex time. Wherever possible, people could call out and say, "I need a mental health day," and they'll be granted a mental health day. And we just, I suppose, tested everything month to month, and we changed everything month to month. I think I'm now on version 9 of the framework for our program. So I've written a massive 24-page document, which is how big our model of care is, 9 times now, to incorporate every single thing that we've learned, every single thing that we've experienced along our particular journey. I think I'm close to running out of time soon, so I don't know what more I can say about this particular topic or about our particular experiences, other than one of the things that we did to keep ourselves centered and to keep ourselves on task was to frequently reorient each other and to remind each other that we're here in service. We're here to help people rebuild their lives. That sometimes when our things get overwhelming, we just need to kind of push that aside for a little bit. Like we can, deal with it through counselling, deal with it through supervision, deal with it through a mental health day. But when we're on the job, we need to remember that regardless of what's going on for us, people need our help, and we need to keep our head in the game, and we need to remain resilient, we need to remain strong, and we need to keep going. And that might sound counterintuitive to some of you, and it might seem like it's placing pressure on ourselves, but it was very easy to get distracted last year. And I think it's very easy to get distracted in general whenever you're facing anything which is emotional and traumatic, such as helping people who have lost everything. And reminding yourself of the reason that you're here, the reason that you chose the job, the purpose that you have, can kind of stabilize you when everything else around you feels a little bit unstable. Across the last 18 months, we've learned, I think, a great deal about ourselves, a great deal about the fragility of mental health, a great deal about how important it is to maintain connection in whatever way you can, maintain things like exercise, find opportunities to be absurd and to be stupid. At one point last year, things were so bad, we felt like we were constantly sprinkling glitter on, forgive my language, I'm going to say it, on shit. So we would constantly be on a device called Slack, sending ridiculous memes to each other with little cupcake pictures that looked like poo and glitter falling on top of them. We'd be sending outrageous and crazy things that were just stupid and that your children wouldn't even laugh at, but that we found hysterically amusing because it would remind us of a particular experience that we had as a team, or it would remind us of the difficulties that we're facing but overcoming. So finding time to have fun and scheduling that in. I know it sounds stupid, but we would schedule in moments where we could get together and we could be stupid. That really helped all of us a great deal. And I think just to wrap up, that the biggest thing that helped us was knowing that we weren't in it alone. Bushfire recovery, there's about 40 different agencies that work in the Upper Murray, and over in Gippsland there's probably more. And we're all experiencing similar professional issues, similar personal issues, and we've developed some really good networks that enable us to depend on each other. One of the coordinators for Bushfire Recovery Victoria and I have a regular phone call every Friday where we just talk about the crap that happened throughout the week, and we have a laugh about some of the insane things that happened in network meetings, or we talk about some of the new clients which are emerging and what we can do to help them, because there's less money this year than there was last year. And I do that with a number of different colleagues. I think the willingness to support each other, but also to extend that support to your colleagues, to build those networks and to enrich them by informal as well as formal levels of communication, can really assist you as well as your clients to overcome anything that you face. I had a whole bunch of notes written, which I totally abandoned. I had a wonderful slideshow prepared, which I never sent across because no 2 days in bushfire recovery are exactly the same. And this week has been a ripper. It's been one challenge after another. So I apologise if this has been a little bit disjointed. I suppose the takeaway messages are that quite often your team is your best support. Quite often having a strong organisation at your back, which will just let you get on with your work, can also be one of your best supports. Our CEO, our general managers, they trust us to do the work that we need to do, and they let us have quite a, they give us a lot of latitude. That they know that there's nothing like what we do at Gateway, and they know that we're hopefully professional enough and well trained enough to do everything the right way without needing too much close supervision. So, that ability to go to your manager and say, or in my case, the general manager, and say, don't micromanage me, just let me do my thing. And then have her let me do my thing. That's amazing. The ability to have frank and honest conversations with the CEO and with the general manager, for me, has been a remarkable way of managing my stress. Engaging in clinical supervision after 28 years in the sector, and I've been doing everything from working with the police to bust pedophile rings to working with gangs and people who are gravitating toward to violent extremism. Clinical supervision is the only thing that has kept me sane. It's the only thing that stopped me from burning out. Our industry has a high burnout rate. So if you're not engaging in clinical supervision, I strongly recommend that you go and do that. If you're managing a team like I am, I really highly recommend that you get external supervision, that you bring external people in to work with your team so that they can have a safe space where they can say whatever they need to say without fearing that it might come back to me or to somebody else within the organisation. And other than that, it's the general stuff. It's the exercise. It's the diet. We all got the COVID-5 or the COVID 10 kilograms last year, but making time to get out, to exercise with your colleagues, to even just take a walk with them and to discuss some of the issues that you've been encountering can be incredibly helpful. It looks like from the little counter, which is underneath my head, that I've gone 30-something seconds over time, where I've got 30-something seconds left. So I will wrap up now. I again apologise for the disjointed nature of this. As I said, it's been a crazy week for me. And I thank everybody who is contributing to this discussion today, because it's such an important topic. And it's so easy for any one of us to fall down if we don't have the correct supports around us.
Absolutely. Jarryd, thank you so much. Your stories are incredibly powerful, and I think have given everybody a real taste of actually what you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And I can imagine it would be very hard not to make a connection with somebody whose life literally you are helping to build from the ashes and to rebuild, when literally their entire lives have been destroyed, and it's not just part of their life that they might be struggling with, but the whole thing. What really has stood out for me was the number of times you said the word connection, the importance of connecting with your colleagues and your peers, and particularly those that are going through the same thing, because you can do things like have the silly days and put the glitter on the cupcakes. You can actually talk with one another and share and know that there's going to be a deep level of understanding about what you're going through, and a really deep level of empathy about what you might be facing. So Jarryd, thank you so much for sharing really honestly some of your experiences and the experiences of your team at Gateway. It's incredibly appreciated. And again, I hope you stay on for question and answers if we have time at the end. Thank you. Thank you again to Jarryd. We're going to take a short break now. We'll be playing a short video for anyone that doesn't want to hop up and stretch their legs, but I do encourage you to hop up, grab a glass of water or a cup of tea, or it's even getting to wine o'clock. So we'll see you in 5 or 6 minutes. Thank you.
I'm Elena Hart. I work with a festival in town doing the marketing and events, and I do a bit of baking as well for some places around town, and also we have a property just between here and Barcaldine down the road. In the big scheme of things, we are very new to cattle. Like obviously Sam's been doing it for a lot longer because his family had cattle, but for us together, we're relatively new to the game, so it's been a steep learning curve. The thing that I struggled with the most was it just all of a sudden became everything we talked about. Even when you go to bed at night, you're like, first thing in the morning at 6 a.m, you wake up, you roll over and you start talking about cattle, and it's so consuming, and you don't realise that it's consumed you until you're there. We put into play the 9 to 5 rule, and sometimes it doesn't work, obviously, but you try your best. So we really try and keep all of our business talk and business decisions between 9 to 5 so that it doesn't all consume us. It's hard when you can't get away from it, and we have always said that we wouldn't live on our place. And I know that doesn't suit a lot of people, but you need to be able to get away from it. And whether that's emotionally or mentally or physically, then it's a very important step that you have to take.
So I guess one of the main things we've learnt from our previous research with farmers and rural communities is that people living in these communities, particularly farmers, are faced with lots of things beyond their control. And I think one of the biggest barriers in making choices to access help and improve their own well-being is this ingrained kind of belief that the farm has to come first. And unfortunately, farm work's never over, and often people live and work in the same place. One of the most important things I think for people to remember is that not everything their mind says to them is true. So it's actually really helpful if you can start trying to treat your thoughts as mental events rather than the truth. And sometimes when I talk to rural people about this, they say, oh, well, yeah, that's easier said than done. How do you actually do that? If you can notice the sorts of things that your mind is worrying about, or the sorts of stories that your mind is kind of getting hooked into, then it's really useful if you can write 3 lists. In the first list, you might have something that you can act on right now, like, for example, did I turn the tap off? In the second list, you might list the problems that you need to solve and you can solve, but you can't do immediately. So write them down and write beside them a time when you can do it. And in the third column, if you can get onto paper all of the things that are buzzing around in your head, but they're the things that you can't control, fix, or answer. So if you can get that out of your head and onto paper, it then gives you the capacity to make the choice to kind of let it go and put your attention on something else. I think it's really important that we model to each other in the farming and in rural communities that taking the time to learn these important life skills is a really worthwhile investment of your time.
We've both got off-farm things to keep us entertained. You know, going to social events and catching up with people, having a beer with a mate, that sort of thing. I think that is really important. Just reminding yourself that there is things outside of the property. I think hobbies are important, to have hobbies that aren't just farm related. I love baking, I love the distraction and that you're busy with your hands. I think that really helps for me. What works for one person won't work for the other because we are all so different. I take a lot from the people around me, from the community. I think we both do. We take a lot from the community. It's hard to say how it impacts other people because everyone keeps it, like, plays their cards so close to their chest, so you don't want to assume that someone's, you know, in a particular situation or acting a particular way. But I find if you open up to people, they then take them on as like, oh yeah, I can open up to you as well. And it really starts a conversation. It's a lead by example situation.
Welcome back, everybody. And for those of you that watched that video from Australian Red Cross, there's a series of videos that they provide. And I'd also like to mention Jolie's organisation provides a series of videos that you can access and view. And some of those are just fabulous as well. I'm really pleased to introduce our final speaker for today, David Younger. David is a clinical and consultant psychologist who has more than 10 years experience supporting communities, individuals, organisations and agencies, as well as local and state governments affected by natural disasters and emergencies throughout Australia. David has extensive experience in community recovery and consultation, training and development, peer supervision and leadership, as well as a range of other innovative projects. David is also a member of the Victorian Government Psychosocial Reference Group, which provides specialist advice to the government on issues around emergencies and disasters, including, of course, recovery. So welcome, David.
Thank you, Bridget, and thank you everyone out there who's participating in these conversations for taking the time out of your day and out of your afternoon. And also thanks very much to Jolie and Jarryd for their contributions and conversations and setting such a wonderful background to this particular session. So I'm going to talk about or touch on two key areas or two key topics today. The first one being the psychological and psychosocial impacts of disasters. I want to share with you some of the key features and characteristics of natural disaster events, some of which many of you will be familiar with already, but I think it's also, and particularly in light of the cumulative events that have been occurring over the last 18 to 24 months, important and helpful to touch on this again. I'll then secondly talk about the impact of disasters on staff involved in recovery. So like Jolie and Jarryd, maintaining staff well-being and your own well-being within the context of disasters is very important and close to my heart as well. In 2009, I guess I was a relatively new psychologist, having been practicing for about 3 or 4 years, with the main aim of working in and servicing semi-rural and rural areas. So I'd actually set up a practice in Kinglake in about 2006, 2007, I think it was. And then I moved off the mountain and set up a private practice location in the rather small and sleepier town back then of Whittlesea, which some of you would probably be aware of, Whittlesea being at the base of Kinglake. And then in 2009, the Black Saturday bushfires came along and everything changed. And my comment tends to be that the next 5 years of my private practice work was incredibly intense, listening to many trauma and survival stories. It was within that work and because of that work that I became particularly interested in the area of self-care and how to maintain health and well-being when you're working in the midst of a disaster event. And that sort of unfolded because across the course of the first year and in the particular building or community health centre that I was located in, I saw many people come and go. And as conversations started to take place in the hallway or in the lunchroom or in various other locations, I started to become aware as to just how intense and challenging people were finding this work. And then towards the end of the first year, I started to detect a series of changes within myself, stress-related and trauma-related changes. And so at that point, I really decided that it was important to seek some external support, assistance and supervision, and came to realise that it was also a very important point where I needed to check in with myself, because I could see that if I was going to remain and continue to be able to support the affected community and the people that I was seeing in my practice, I was really going to need to put in place some strategies to support my health and well-being across the long term. And so that led to a whole series of things, including assisting one of the primary health networks, GP networks they were called back then, set up a peer support group for professionals, which functioned for about 4 years, I think, or 5 years. I went down the path of undertaking further study, a master's, and within that was able to undertake some research, which very interestingly was in the area of post-traumatic growth. And within that particular study, in which we looked at general practitioners, mental health nurses, social workers, bushfire recovery workers supporting bushfire survivors, we actually found that those people who rated themselves or said that they were practicing self-care on a regular basis were those people who were most likely to experience post-traumatic growth, which would be another topic or an entire conversation, but that was a pretty interesting finding. So I just mention this because there's a close connection, and I guess over the years I have seen the entire continuum of impact and effect on people, from those working in recovery immediately after event, right the way through to 8, 9, 10 years after an event, where I end up working with people in the private practice because they're either very depressed or very anxious, or they might have a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder or some other formal mental health condition. And then it becomes a case of working with them very closely and carefully, often for quite a long period of time, as they start to put their mental health and their lives back together. So in terms of these two key, I guess, areas that I'd like to talk to you about, the first one being the psychological and psychosocial impacts of disaster events. We might say that there are 5 key effects that have become to be quite well known and quite well identified. The first one being the disruption, which Jolie, of course, spoke about, but the disruption caused by natural disaster events. And this is a reference to the way in which, prior to an event, people's normally, or relatively normally, ordinary lives become disrupted. All of the taken for granted routines and the constancies or the constants that are contained within those routines become upset and disrupted, and life takes on a very, very different experience. The disruption can be really quite profound and can last for an extremely long period of time, many years. That disruption in turn can cause an increased level of stress, cumulative stress, or often we talk about cortisol-related stress, or more commonly the endurance mode, the running a marathon that many community members find themselves having to do in order to work through the recovery process. So stress and heightened stress is a second key effect. A third relates to loss and the varying types of loss that people experience. We should never, and I guess we always make the comment to community members as well as people working in the area, that we should really be very careful about ever making assumptions about the type of loss that a person has experienced, because we really don't know what their individual experience is until we have a conversation with them. Loss is certainly not just material loss, and many of you out there would be aware of that and understand that. There's then also the possibility and the quite strong likelihood that someone has had a frightening experience, that they will have had activation of their survival mode, fight, flight or freeze, or the adrenaline state of stress. Now, having a very frightening experience doesn't in and of itself mean that a person becomes traumatized. In fact, most people don't, but then trauma is something that can come about, and very definitely does come about for some people, unfortunately, after a natural disaster event. So disruption, stress, loss and frightening experiences are key effects often for many people and community members who experience a natural disaster. Fifthly, and this has been touched on already by the 2 prior speakers, but the cumulative impact of cascading events over the last 18 to 24 months. And this is really quite profound and significant. And I don't know if we're going to end up rewriting the commonly held research findings up to this point in time, but I'm certainly expecting, based on what we're seeing at the moment already, higher rates of formal mental health diagnoses. But then I'd also like to mention within that, that what we shouldn't do is be sidetracked by whether a community member has a formal mental health diagnosis or not. That's certainly not the be-all and end-all. So many people do not end up fitting a formal mental health diagnosis, but the quality of their life does become affected over the prolonged period of time that recovery encapsulates. I also wanted to touch on as well, in addition to these 5 key effects, I also wanted to bring into this conversation, because they often can become lost and get forgotten amidst the conversations of adults who are experiencing a natural disaster event out there in the community. But I wanted to touch on children and adolescents as well, because there's also been there's 2 main reasons for this. One is that it's become quite well identified within the research that experiencing a natural disaster, again, for the smaller proportion of children and adolescents, can have a profound, long-lasting impact and effect. And what we've also come to realise and become better equipped to understand is that the key carers, or the adults, the parents, and the family dynamic that a child or an adolescent is in at the time of a disaster and for the period of time afterwards certainly does impact and affect their recovery experience. really important for the adults and key carers in a child's life to be working through their own stuff and to be giving attention and focus and maintaining a connection that is a good quality connection and a meaningful connection and relationship with children in order to assist them in their recovery experience. I wanted to then just briefly touch on observations from the last 2 years. Going back to the Black Summer fires, where not too long after those fires, early 2020, I was involved in a whole series of debriefs with various organisations throughout New South Wales and Victoria. And what really became incredibly apparent as a result of those particular sessions was the profound nature of those fires, given the length of time that they went for, and also the severity or the intensity of people's experiences. So many people spoke about not just the one evacuation, but the 5 or the 6 or the 7 different evacuation experiences that they had, and how that led to incredibly high levels of tiredness and fatigue. Then the virus came, and for some people the virus came only 4 weeks or so after the ending of the fires in Marchish in 2020, and the virus and the disruption that it brought along in combination with lockdown had the very significant effect of disrupting the entire process of social connection that is so important for community and underpins their recovery process. Then in Victoria and also in New South Wales, what we noticed was that it wasn't really until the end of last year, 2020, or perhaps even 3/4 of the way through, that community members started to reform connections as a result of the disruption caused by lockdowns. And so we noticed that people toward the end of the first year were probably at about where we would ordinarily see them 3 to 6 months after a disaster experience. They were also demonstrating very, very high levels of fatigue. And we saw in children, and we're seeing this again now as well, and I just want to bring children back in, evidence of regressive behaviours in children. And so regression is when children and or adolescents revert to an earlier stage of development. And this is something that's well known and understood and recognised, but it is a key indicator that children and adolescents have had quite a profound experience that they're trying to work through. So we saw that occurring towards the end of last year, and we have seen that very clearly occurring here in Victoria following the storms. But I've also come across this in schools that have had no natural disaster experience either. You know, the impact and the effect would appear to have been COVID disruption and lockdowns. Now, to move on to the second area I wanted to touch on, recovery staff working in the area, working recovery staff. So what I've come to see over time is that often those that are most at risk are those that don't have prior experience to draw on. They haven't worked after a disaster event previously, and or they live in or close to a disaster affected area. So they're a community member that becomes caught up in the recovery and ends up working in the recovery. And often they also have their own, as a result of that, personal experience, which can have varying levels of intensity. And then what also seems to be often the straw that breaks the camel's back is a lack of organisational support. So there seems to be something along those lines, or that sort of combination. And then when you start linking this with the individual characteristics or personality characteristics that often we find in people who work in recovery. So, for example, deep levels of motivation to support, high levels of empathy, high levels of self-sacrifice, that is the inherent tendency to put others first and self last, combined with challenges in knowing how to hold a professional role and how to maintain boundaries, then I've seen that combination as well, unfortunately, open the door to psychological injury time and time again. And, you know, what we really need to remember here, and again, many of you will be aware of and familiar with this given your work, but what we really need to remember is that relationships or connections with community members, along with the language that's used or the language that we use, these really are two of the main tools that we have to work with when we're supporting people in recovery. But all of this is occurring in a highly stressful environment, you know, that either in adrenaline survival mode or cortisol endurance mode more likely, with exposure to traumatic information, and often in a context where there's organisational or bureaucratic complexity with predetermined outcomes or goals. And so there's quite a combination of things that can come together there that can really run the risk of having significant impact and effect on a person's health and well-being. It's a complex area to understand, and it's also complex to try to prevent. I mean, I really took note of Jolie's comment that in New Zealand, I think she mentioned, they sort of threw everything at trying to support their own staff, but still they noticed people being affected. And then she made the comment that, we just need to realise this is a really tough and challenging area to work in, and it is hard work. So the commonly observed, I guess, impacts and effects on staff wellbeing will be things like burnout, compassion fatigue, or vicarious traumatisation. But on the other hand, anger, frustration with the support services for not doing what they're perceived to be supposed to be doing. We might also see people inadvertently falling into too strong a role of advocating for clients. Now, I certainly don't mean to not advocate for clients, but what I'm referring to there is advocating strongly when all boundaries have been lost, because that opens the door to recovery staff becoming completely contaminated with a survivor's personal experiences. And so, as I touched on, I've seen the effects all the way along the continuum, from right at the beginning, immediately after an event, to 10 years down the track, where someone happens to come along and say, there was a disaster event that I was involved in the recovery. And, I think I've never actually worked through the experiences that I had then, and it can be many, many years later. So over time, I've become aware of and developed the very strong view that there's a dual and shared responsibility between organisation and individual. So on the one hand, I fundamentally believe so strongly that organisations have a responsibility to raise awareness and understanding within their staff about the importance of self-care and preventing injury, and advising them of the risks. But secondly, I also strongly believe that individuals themselves and staff need to take responsibility for managing their own health and well-being, and not place responsibility purely onto the organisation. It's a dual or a shared responsibility. And so for organisations, some of the things that can be quite helpful are to, for example, give staff advance notice that they're going to be transitioned back to business as usual. Not for a significant change like that when people have been working so closely with community to happen all of a sudden with little notice. Secondly, for organisations to create opportunities within the normal working day across the continuum of recovery to support people to talk about the experiences that they're having, not just formally, not just the standard referral off to EAP, but informal conversations and supporting that within teams is incredibly valuable. Talking enables processing, and processing enables digestion of experience. Digestion means we make sense of the experiences that we've had, which is a much better option as opposed to carrying them around in our heads for many, many years. Thirdly, to give staff opportunity to provide feedback, and then for the organisation to tell staff how they're going to use that feedback. How is it actually going to be used the next time, for the next event or in the future? And then also to, when it's possible, to clearly communicate to staff that have been working in recovery how the community will continue to be supported over time. These connections, these relationships that are formed with community members that are recovering, what's harmful is when they're just severed with little warning. They do have to come to an end at some point, but our very nature as human beings and the emotions that we experience means that process of a relationship changing can be supported by ongoing knowledge and information about what is being done to support people in the long term. From an individual perspective, I would touch on three main layers or levels. I'll just wrap up with this and then mention one other thing. And three layers that you can think of from your own perspective or your own work is, well, one, what I call the core level, that relates to you as a person, your values, your beliefs, why you're involved in recovery and working in the field. The stronger and clearer you are on those, the better protected you'll be. Secondly, it's important to have some really good daily techniques that you use, whatever they might happen to be. Running, riding, meditating, mindfulness. There's a whole range. The list goes on. And the third level or the layer is the professional, the organisational support that's available that also has many different dimensions. Just to finish on then, so I notice I'm also almost out of time. I want to point out the very strong tendency, the very strong characteristic, I should say, or trait that people who work in recovery are often self-sacrificing and high in empathy. Therefore, it feels unfamiliar, awkward, and often people experience guilt at the thought of taking care of themselves and not others. But what I want to mention is really so fundamentally important is that if you're not well or your health begins to deteriorate, you won't be able to help community for the long term anyway. Something will happen sooner or later. You should actually never assume that it won't happen to you, because it can and in fact does happen to many, many people. That is, they become unwell over time. So I think at the very core, there's an individual challenge of reshaping core beliefs within yourself potentially, core beliefs that are healthy and helpful, and recognise and validate the need to take care of self. Sometimes that needs to be first, over and above anything else, or over and above other aspects or dimensions of your life. But once you do that, and once you can see and accept that that is acceptable and that it's necessary and important, you've taken a very important step forward in regard to maintaining your health and well-being over the long term. All right, thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you, David. Just a whole list of really important and insightful messages from you. And one of the things that really has stood out for me was the importance of organisational support, and both staff members being capable and able to reach out and ask for that support when they need it, to identify when they might need it, but also to be able to organisations to have those structures and processes in place. And I think it comes down to organisational resilience in a lot of ways. And most organisations will have things like EAPs in place, professional debriefing or supervision for the day-to-day work that they do. And often that work, of course, is around trauma-informed care for clients. But what is really different, and as you outlined really clearly, is when you're dealing with people and communities that have facing disruption, stress, loss, fear, and the cumulative impact, that there's a whole nother layer of support, a whole nother level of support that's really required to support those staff members. Organisations tend not to have that in place. Most organisations don't think they're going to have to face a disaster or a major emergency, nor do they necessarily think that their own staff will actually be playing a role. In addition, of course, organisations aren't funded to prepare in this way and to have these systems and processes put into place, and it's something certainly that VCOSS advocates for on behalf of the community sector. So, David, thank you for those insights. I think there's been a real focus on the role of emergency services and the mental health of emergency services and first responders. And from this conversation today, one of the things that I've certainly taken away is the importance that we need to now place on that next level. What happens after the lights and sirens are gone, and who is there supporting those community members to rebuild their lives, and how are we making sure we're looking after those people. So look, we do have time for a couple of questions. So I'm going to get our AV text to bring everybody back, which is absolutely fantastic. Thank you. Hello. Welcome back to Jarryd and to Jolie as well. Jolie, I've got a question for you. In your experience, have you found that there's a stigma around staff admitting that they're struggling and needing help? Do you feel like they feel that need to soldier on? And I think David certainly touched on it earlier, but what's your impression? Oh, we're just having trouble with our audio. That's okay. Look, we'll wait for Jolie to come back. David, What about if we see a colleague and it seems like they're struggling? What's the best way to approach a colleague? Is it always good to say something? And what should you say?
Yeah, I think definitely it's important to check in with a colleague. Definitely important to check in with a colleague. And I guess we're working on the assumption that colleagues generally have pre-existing relationships with each other. I think it's important also as a staff member to perhaps start the conversation and talk about your own vulnerabilities or your own challenges, because that can be an entry point into a more open conversation, rather than just directly asking people how they're going or if they're okay, although you can do that, but for some people that won't necessarily precipitate an open response.
That's a great suggestion, and I think certainly what we've heard from everybody today is, the really importance of acknowledging our own humanity in a disaster context. Most people don't have to face a disaster in their lifetimes, and nobody wants to, and certainly it's one thing that brings us together. Jarryd, any tips for how to manage when clients might be contacting you via social media or mobile outside of those work hours? And I'm sure it's happened with you and your staff, and you're just feeling overwhelmed and you need the break. How do you manage that?
We're quite strict about that. I'm lucky in that not all of my team are on social media. Quite a few of us have seen just how destructive that can be, not only in the recovery space, but in past jobs that we've had working with teenagers and families. So quite a few of us have a less than favourable view of social media. We made it very clear at the beginning that those sorts of communications couldn't be entered into, and we had the team make changes to their Facebook pages so that they were a little bit more anonymous, so that certain things couldn't be seen, and that seems to have worked. We do stay abreast of things, those who do have Facebook, via some of the groups that exist for the recovery initiatives, and there's a number of community recovery committees who put stuff up on a regular basis. So, we read there, we comment there, sometimes they can respond to us there. And to date, that's been a really good control, and they've not tried to seek us out online and actively engage via our personal accounts.
That's fantastic insight and terrific ideas. Thanks, Jarryd. So back to you, Jolie. The question around stigma around community service staff admitting that they're struggling and might need help. What are your impressions?
We definitely saw two things. One, as carers, that often we're not very good at recognising that we have our own needs, that people find that difficult to do. And secondly, some people felt that, depending on their organisation, that they might get pulled off the very important work that they're very called to do, or might be penalised in some way if they are asking for some support. But what I found really fascinating is I thought there'd be a real cultural component, and there is for sure, but there's also a very universal component to this. In that, speaking to New Zealanders about this challenge, we often hear people say, well, that's unique to us because we have the number 8 wire kind of approach to things, which means that from a pioneering perspective, that we can fix anything ourselves, because you have to be able to be resourceful with a piece of fencing wire, right? And so there's that sensefulness, so you don't ask for help, you find a way to fix it yourself. And then when we came to Australia, there was something very similar. When I went to Japan, they talked there about the samurai complex, because you don't show weakness, right? And then when I went to the States, they said, but it's different here. We have this cultural thing that's unique to us, and that's the John Wayne complex, where we have to carry the weight on our shoulders and show that we're tough. So it was just very fascinating that I think, some of the stigma is very self-imposed in terms of how we tell ourselves that we must react and respond, but also quite imbued in teams and organisations in this space as well. So it's a really important one to challenge wherever we can.
Thank you, Jolie. Absolutely fabulous answers. Speakers, we have run out of time, which is really disappointing because we've still got questions coming in, and I know that we could sit and talk for at least another hour and explore this topic in more detail. This has been an absolutely fabulous session. I'd like to really thank you all for coming along and sharing your time, your insights and your expertise with us today, and with attendees. And I know that this is a topic that is going to be of interest in the months ahead as COVID continues and as the next disaster looms, of course. Thank you again for your time. Thank you to Emma. Thank you to our fabulous Auslan interpreters. Thank you to Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation. We will see you at our next disaster recovery conversation. We'll be focusing on the role of the arts and creativity in disaster recovery, so a bit of a different tack from today, and we certainly hope to see you there. Thanks all for coming along, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.